Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Ukraine fires U.S.-provided ATACMS into Russia. So the big escalation has happened. This was the big news on Tuesday. Ukraine has fired U.S.-provided Army tactical missile systems, or ATACMS, into Russia's Bryansk Oblast, marking a major escalation of the conflict that Russia has made clear risks nuclear war. The escalation came as Russian President Vladimir Putin formalized changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine that lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, a step that he took in direct response to President Biden authorizing these ATACMS strikes. So I've been talking about how Putin ordered changes to this nuclear doctrine, and now he's made them official. And, he did that. I'm not sure the order of things here. It looked like the ATACMS were fired early in the morning in Russia. So I think it was actually after they were fired that he signed off on this. And again, these ATACMS missiles have a range of about 190 miles. So this is the statement from the Russian Defense Ministry. It said, quote, "At 3:25 a.m. this morning, the enemy struck a site on the territory of the Bryansk region with 6 ballistic missiles. According to confirmed data, U.S.-made ATACMS tactical missiles were used. As a result of an anti-missile battle, 5 missiles were shot down and 1 was damaged by crews of S-400 and Pantsir missile defense systems," end quote. So they're saying that they intercepted 5 of the missiles and they damaged 1 of them. The Defense Ministry said that missile debris fell on the territory of a military site, causing a fire, but there was no damage or casualties. So Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the attack shows that the West seeks escalation, pointing to the fact that Ukraine cannot fire ATACMS without U.S.-provided intelligence. Lavrov said, quote, "The fact that multiple ATACMS were used last night against the Bryansk region signals that they want escalation. You see, it is impossible to use these high-tech missiles without the Americans, and Putin has repeatedly said this," end quote. Lavrov also said that he hopes Ukraine's Western backers read Russia's new nuclear doctrine, which considers an attack by a non-nuclear armed state that's supported by a nuclear armed power as a joint attack. So under this new nuclear doctrine, Russia considers what happened early Tuesday morning an American attack on their soil. The doctrine allows the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack against Russia or Belarus if it is deemed a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty, and that's a big change in the language. Their previous nuclear doctrine allowed for the use of nuclear weapons if there was a threat to the existence of the Russian state, a threat, an existential threat. But now they can justify using nuclear weapons if they deem something as a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty. The nuclear doctrine states that Russia's nuclear deterrence is aimed at, quote, "a potential adversary which may encompass individual countries and military alliances that regard Russia as a potential enemy and possess nuclear and or other weapons of mass destruction or have substantial combat capabilities of general purpose forces," end quote. So clearly, NATO is in mind here with this nuclear doctrine. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, the current deputy chair of Russia's Security Council, wrote on X that the new nuclear doctrine means Russia can use weapons of mass destruction against Ukraine and NATO. And Medvedev, he's been kind of the attack dog. He's always saying very provocative things, but I still think this is worth sharing what he said here. So again, this is the deputy of the Russian Security Council, former Russian president. He wrote this on X. He wrote it in English. Quote, "Russia's new nuclear doctrine means NATO missiles fired against our country could be deemed an attack by the bloc on Russia. Russia could retaliate with WMD against Kiev and key NATO facilities wherever they're located. That means World War III, end quote. So saying that they could use weapons of mass destruction in response to this. And, you know, kind of the craziest thing about this whole escalation is that it's not going to help Ukraine on the battlefield. It's only just risking escalation, this thing turning into a bigger war, this thing turning into World War III or nuclear war. When the New York Times first reported on Sunday that Biden authorized these strikes, they cited U.S. officials who said they don't think, they didn't expect it to actually alter the course of the war. Well, I mean, it's certainly going to alter the course of it if Russia does decide to respond in a big way. And that's the question. How is Russia going to respond? You know, you have this incoming Trump administration. So I think there's a good chance Russia doesn't go after the U.S. for this, but I would be, I'm sure they're going to respond in some way. And it could mean really ramping up attacks on Ukraine, using a weapon that they haven't used before in Ukraine, or potentially targeting Ukrainian leadership. I would guess they would do something like that before striking a NATO base in Europe or striking the U.S. I mean, they're saying that they consider this an attack by the U.S. So, I mean, it's just incredible that we've gotten to this point. I wish we would see, you know, Trump, members of his team coming out and really denouncing this. I mean, we saw his son do that, but I mean, like, members of the incoming administration really need to make clear that they're not on board with this. All right, so the next one here. The majority of Ukrainians want peace talks to end the war with Russia. So a poll released by Gallup on Tuesday found that the majority of Ukrainians want peace talks to end the war with Russia. The poll, conducted in August and October, found that 52% of respondents wanted talks with Russia to end the conflict as soon as possible, while 38% believed Ukraine should keep fighting, and 9% said they didn't know or refused to answer. So out of the 52% who favor negotiations, 52% of that 52%, which is a little confusing, but this is out of the people who said that they want negotiations, 52% of them said that Ukraine should be open to territorial concessions, while 38% disagreed and 10% said they weren't sure. So the survey marks the first time since the Russian invasion that a Gallup poll found the majority of Ukrainians favored negotiations to end the war. The support for peace talks is stronger in eastern areas of Ukraine near the front lines, where 63% want negotiations to end the war and only 27% want the fighting to continue. So the Ukrainians who actually have to live close to the front lines and deal with this every day, they want negotiations. They want peace talks. The poll, which was published on the 1,000th day of the war, and those ATACMS missiles were fired on the 1,000th day of this war. This poll came amid this major escalation, as I said. And so, you know, no clear path to Ukrainian victory. Ukrainians want talks, but the Biden administration just appears to be doing whatever they can to escalate this thing. And even though Zelensky still claims, you know, his goals for victory are pushing Russia out of all the territory that they control, he's also saying that the war has to end in 2025 and that it's going to end through diplomatic means. So he must know realistically that means he's going to have to give up some territory. So again, this escalation, the ATACMS thing, I mean, it does seem like they really want to provoke something big here. I mean, I just can't think of any other possible reason why they would sign off on this. Again, something that's not going to help Ukraine on the battlefield. It's just such a huge risk. All right, so the next one here, Jake Sullivan says Ukraine should expand conscription. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. In an interview with PBS NewsHour, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called for Ukraine to step up its mobilization efforts as Kiev is facing a manpower shortage. President Joe Biden's top foreign policy advisor also admitted that advanced American weapon systems have had little battlefield impact. In his conversation with Nick Schifrin on Monday, Sullivan said, quote, our view has been that there's not one weapon system that makes a difference in this battle. It's about manpower, and Ukraine needs to do more, in our view, to firm up its lines in terms of the number of forces it has on the front lines. Where is the straightest line between Ukrainian performance and inputs? It's on mobilization and manpower, end quote. So basically saying they want more conscription. And recently, an aide to Zelensky said that they were being pressured by American politicians from both political parties to lower the age of conscription. They dropped the conscription age from 27 to 25 earlier this year, but the Americans want 18-year-olds out there. They want to throw the young men into this meat grinder. And it really is amazing. I mean, you see Jake Sullivan saying there, yeah, there's not one weapon system that's really going to make a difference. It's about manpower. Then why are you supporting these ATACMS strikes in Russia? And that's another thing. I mean, I think I mentioned in the first story that the really important thing here is that the U.S. isn't just giving Ukraine permission to fire these ATACMS into Russia. They're not just letting them do it. They're supporting them. They're actively, directly supporting these strikes because they require intelligence from the U.S. to use those missile systems. So it's just completely insane. And here you have Jake Sullivan even just saying, oh, there's not one weapon system. No, they need more people. Well, they don't have more people. So you're just why are you going to give them all these weapons? Why are you going to keep doing this? So in the interview, Sullivan admitted that Washington's most advanced military equipment has not made a difference on the battlefield. He said, quote, "We have provided the tanks. We have provided the F-16s. We have provided the HIMARS. We have provided the Patriots. We have provided many of the things that you said earlier we wouldn't provide. And it's not back then. It's rather today that Ukraine finds itself in a more challenged position on the battlefield, suggesting that there's not a straight line between those weapon systems and how it does on the battlefield," end quote. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 50 Palestinians in Gaza in 24 hours. Of course, the slaughter in Gaza continues every day. Gaza's health ministry said Tuesday that Israeli attacks killed at least 50 Palestinians and wounded 110 in the previous 24-hour period amid Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza and its continued strikes across the Strip. The Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that at least 8 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli strike on a residential building in Beit Lahia, one of the northern cities that has been under a total Israeli siege since early October as part of the ethnic cleansing campaign. In central Gaza, Israeli strikes hit the Nuseirat and Barej refugee camps, killing at least 4 Palestinians. Al Jazeera reported that Israeli shelling in Nuseirat killed an infant. This has been a war on infants. Children are always being killed and maimed in these attacks. As you can see here, this picture, this is at the Al-Adwa hospital in central Gaza. This is a child who was wounded in the Israeli attacks on the Nuseirat refugee camp and was brought to the hospital. And I was, looking through the pictures. Many children were injured in those attacks. Gaza's health ministry said that the latest violence brought its death toll since October 2023 to 43,972 and the number of wounded to 104,008. Separately, Gaza's government media office said out of the 43,972 confirmed deaths, 17,492 were children. The media office said that 825 children under the age of 1 had been killed by Israel, and this number is just, they said 211 newborns were born and killed over the past 13 months. So born into this war, into this genocidal war, and killed by it. And also there is the newborns, the babies who have died of starvation, malnutrition, because they can't get milk and things like that. I mean, it's just absolutely horrific. The office also warned that 3,500 children are currently at risk of dying of malnutrition. So the death toll from the health ministry is considered a low estimate since it doesn't account for the Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. And as I always mention, the American healthcare workers who volunteered in Gaza, they looked at the data, they did math. They believe that at least 118,908 Palestinians have been killed by violence and the Israeli siege. That includes indirect deaths like starvation. And that was an estimate they gave in October. All right, so the next one here. 4 U.S. senators will vote to block weapon shipments to Israel. So Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont led a press conference with 3 other senators on Tuesday to discuss their plans to vote in support of resolutions to block several weapon sales to Israel. Sanders said that the Senate will vote on Wednesday on 3 separate resolutions he introduced, known as joint resolutions of disapproval, that seek to block the sales of 120mm tank rounds, 120mm mortar rounds, and JDAM bomb kits. Sanders was joined by Senators Peter Welch, Democrat, the other senator in Vermont, Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, and Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland. They have co-sponsored these resolutions. In making his case for the resolution, Sanders pointed to U.S. foreign assistance laws that prohibit military aid to countries that intentionally block humanitarian aid and commit human rights violations using U.S. weapons. Sanders said, quote, Israel is clearly in violation of these laws. Under these circumstances, it is illegal for the U.S. government to provide them with more offensive weaponry. Joint resolutions of disapproval are Congress's tools to enforce these laws. End quote. Sanders noted that the levels of aid entering the Gaza Strip are at the lowest point yet. He said, quote, the result, and let's be very clear about this, the result is that many, many thousands of children are facing malnutrition and starvation, end quote. Senator Welch said that what's, quote, unfolding before our very eyes right now is mass starvation and the spread of disease. Is the United States and its foreign policy forced to be blind to the suffering before our very eyes, end quote. So the resolutions, they don't have a chance of actually passing through the Senate, but this vote will provide a record of the senators who support continuing to arm Israel and the senators who oppose it, or at least oppose these weapons deals. And, you know, again, this comes as Israel is openly conducting this ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza, starving people out, killing people who stay behind. I mean, it's about as bad as it's been. And again, it's very clear. You know, you don't see it talked about in American mainstream media, but the Israeli media calls it a cleansing campaign. Haaretz has called it ethnic cleansing. This is happening. You know, people know that it's happening, but they still want to keep shipping these weapons to Israel because of the control, the influence that Israel has, you know, the Israel lobby and everything. I mean, I think I mentioned this yesterday. Dropsite News said that 6 senators are probably going to vote for it. I didn't see who the other 2 were, but I mean, out of 100 senators, it's just absolutely despicable the fact that it probably is only going to be a handful, 4 to 6 senators vote to block this amid these atrocities and war crimes being committed by Israel with American weapons and American funding. So, and then Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, he's the incoming Senate Majority Leader. He took aim at Sanders' resolutions in comments on Tuesday, where he vowed the Senate will make clear the U.S. stands squarely behind Israel when Republicans take over in 6 weeks. He said, quote, for the past year plus, Democrats have struggled to support our ally Israel. For example, we are expecting tomorrow Senator Sanders to offer a resolution denying lethal aid to Israel. The refusal to have our allies' back and the refusal to call out anti-Semitism in our own country has consequences, end quote. And he also said that he will prioritize introducing a bill to sanction the ICC, and he's going to prioritize other pro-Israel legislation. Same thing Mike Johnson said when he became House Speaker. He said Israel was going to be his priority. I think the first vote that he called was some resolution in support of Israel. So Thune said, quote, to our allies in Israel and to the Jewish people around the world, my message to you is this: reinforcements are on the way, end quote. So we're going to have Republican-controlled Senate, Republican-controlled House. And it's amazing. I mean, he says for the past year plus, Democrats have struggled to support our ally Israel. But for the past year, the U.S. has provided more military aid to Israel than in any other year in its history. I mean, it's just a complete joke. This is what the Republicans are coming in and saying. This is what Trump was saying, that Biden abandoned Israel when he's given them more than any other president in American history. It's just a complete joke. But one thing I will say is that the Israel, they're not happy about this bill. The Israel lobby's not happy that this is even being introduced and even being discussed. So, another kind of despicable thing, I think, is that now that we have a Republican coming in, Democrats are going to be more free to criticize the U.S. support for Israel. So I think we'll see more bills like this happen and get a little more support for Democrats. When that happens, this kind of snuck up on me, but we should get kind of a phone call campaign going, urging people to call certain senators like, Rand Paul, who's voted against foreign aid and weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and everything before, try to turn up the pressure. So, when the new Congress comes in, I think we will see more opposition from the Democrats. All right, so the next one here, Israel killed over 200 kids in Lebanon in 2 months. So the UN's Child Relief Agency, UNICEF, said Tuesday that more than 200 children had been killed by Israeli attacks on Lebanon since Israel escalated its bombing campaign in the country in September. UNICEF spokesman James Elder said, quote, despite more than 200 children killed in Lebanon in less than 2 months, a disconcerting pattern has emerged. Their deaths are met with inertia from those able to stop this violence, end quote. Elder detailed some of the recent strikes that killed children, including an attack that slaughtered an entire displaced family. He said, quote, on Sunday, November 10th, 7 children were killed from the same extended family. The family of 27, all killed, was seeking shelter in Mount Lebanon after fleeing violence in the south, end quote. They evacuate, and then they still get killed. Elder said that over the past 2 months, an average of about 3 children have been killed per day by Israel's bombing campaign. He says many more have been injured and traumatized. Hundreds of thousands are homeless, have been displaced. It's 1.2 million. It's estimated 1.2 million people have been displaced in Lebanon. Just another war on children here. And Lebanon's health ministry said Tuesday that the latest Israeli attacks have brought the death toll since October 2023 to 3,544. That's the total death toll. And the majority of the casualties have happened since September 23rd, the day that Israel massively escalated its bombing campaign. And then a week or two later, they invaded the south. All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrike kills 3 soldiers in southern Lebanon army post. This is an article from Jason Ditz. So Israel bombed the Lebanese army again, claiming, even though they've claimed that they're not targeting them, but they targeted an army post in the southern village of Sarafand. At least 3 Lebanese soldiers were slain in the strike and a number of others wounded, including both soldiers and civilians in the surrounding area. The Lebanese health ministry has reported at least 17 people were wounded. It was the second Israeli airstrike targeting an army post in just the last 2 days. On Sunday, they attacked another army post, killing 2 soldiers. The Israeli military never explained that attack, nor have they commented on the strike from Tuesday. So they haven't explained why they targeted the Lebanese military. And so this comes as, there's this talk of a ceasefire. Hochstein was in Beirut speaking with Lebanese officials. But, the strikes, the violence continues. And Hezbollah has been, still putting up very stiff resistance in the south, firing rockets into Israel. So the next one here, Israeli soldier killed, 3 seriously wounded in Hezbollah strike. This is another one from Jason. So an Israeli soldier from the Golani Brigade was reported killed and 3 others seriously wounded in a Hezbollah drone strike. The incident was said to take place about 1 mile from the Israel border in southern Lebanon. The troops were carrying out a logistics and supply operation to support Israeli invasion forces who've been pushing deeper into Lebanon. And the soldiers who were wounded apparently were severely wounded. And this death brings the total number of Israeli soldiers killed in the invasion of Lebanon to at least 49. So I know that might not sound like a lot when we're talking about numbers, the other numbers in Lebanon and in Gaza, but for the Israeli military, that is a lot. They don't like taking casualties at this rate. So we'll see if there's any progress with the ceasefire. I am skeptical, unfortunately, but we'll see what happens. I mean, Lebanon and Hezbollah, the Lebanese government and Hezbollah have both apparently said they they like the latest U.S. proposal, but still no word from Israel. And then we saw yesterday Netanyahu saying, oh, even if there is a ceasefire, we're still going to act against Lebanon and act against Hezbollah in Lebanon. All right, so the next story here, Iraqi Prime Minister al-Sudani rejects Israeli threats. This article is from The Cradle. So Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani blasted Israeli efforts to expand the war in West Asia on November 19th after Israel's foreign minister sent a letter to the UN Security Council urging action against the Iraqi resistance and stressing Israel's right to protect itself. In a cabinet session on Tuesday, Sudani said that, quote, the message sent by the Zionist entity to the UN Security Council represents a pretext and argument to attack Iraq and to achieve the entity's ongoing efforts to expand the war in the region. Iraq rejects these threats. The decision of war and peace is a decision in the hands of the Iraqi state, and no party is allowed to confiscate this right. Iraq rejects entering into war in addition to its steadfastness in the principled position to end the war and seeking to provide relief to the Palestinian and Lebanese peoples, end quote. So basically what happened, the Shia militias have been firing drones at Israel, and apparently they've increased recently. And so Israel's saying, you know, the UN's got to take action. There's other reports saying that the U.S. is pressuring Israel not to attack Iraq. But I think there is a chance of Israel, you know, striking Iraq. And I mean, it goes to show if the U.S. is really preventing these attacks right now, it goes to show that the U.S. does have power over Israel in some ways. So we'll see. You know, this is definitely an area to keep an eye on, is Iraq. And also there's also these reports of the U.S. has really stepped up surveillance flights in Syria and in Iraq where these militias operate. And recently the U.S. launched airstrikes against the militias in Syria. So this is just an area that always has the potential for escalation. So that is it. I left up the one yesterday about the U.S. and the Philippines' new military deal. Go check out our viewpoints. One from David Gornosky. For Doge to hunt waste, it needs Ron Paul to sick it, about that new Department of Government Efficiency. You know, they've been kind of flirting with Ron Paul a bit. We'll see if they actually bring him in. Hopefully they do. The next one from Ted Snyder. All the risk, little gain. The U.S. OK's long-range strikes into Russia. One from Adam Dick. Congressional leadership remains devoted to Israel after selection of new Senate Republican leader, about Thune. One from Judge Napolitano. Gitmo continues to haunt. And one from Colonel Douglas McGregor. Trump and the storm of the century. So please go check all of that out. Another thing that was very exciting today, I got my copy of Provoked by Scott Horton, and this thing is absolutely massive. I mean, it's a huge book. Look at it next to my head, and you see how thick it is. So it's just packed full of good information. It's selling really well on Amazon. We want to get it into the top 100 of all books. I think I saw him post earlier. It was like number 162, but that means it's definitely selling good. So definitely go get a copy if you haven't already. I know the Kindle's coming out soon. He said he's going to, release the audio kind of as a podcast series before the audiobook actually comes out, because it's going to take a while to record, but that way he can release bits of it so people can listen to it. But I think a hardcover is going to come out eventually, but I mean, this thing is massive. It's like a phone book. It's awesome. So, and let's read a couple quotes on the back here. These are just kind of excerpts from these reviews that all these great people gave. So that the first one is from Ron Paul. Scott Horton blows the lid off the mountains of lies used to justify Washington's waste of billions of dollars and countless Ukrainian lives in a futile proxy war with Russia. One from John J. Mearsheimer, a detailed account of America's foolish and dishonest behavior toward Russia in the years since the Cold War ended. I mean, that's the thing. This is a history book from end of the Cold War until the Russian invasion, and then it gets into, of course, stuff with the current war. Colonel Douglas McGregor, Scott Horton's important new book traces America's journey to war and intervention through a succession of presidencies and builds a case that points to a frightening potential final destination for the United States. isolation and alienation from most of the world. Judge Napolitano says Provoked is one of the most thoroughly researched, rationally grounded, and compelling presented assault on war and defense of peace written in English in the post 9/11 era. So that's a very glowing review, and there's a lot more from a lot of really great people. So definitely go get a copy if you haven't. Support this show, like, subscribe, comment, follow us on X, Instagram, follow antiwar.com on Instagram. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.